Section 11 of Chris and the Wonderful Lamp. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Donald Warren. Chris and the Wonderful Lamp by Albert Stearns, in which the genie makes his debut as a prestidigitator. Mr. and Mrs. Green, Mrs. Storms, and Bob were standing at the sitting-room windows, watching the approach of an immense procession of men clad in showy red uniforms, each carrying a long pole surmounted by an electric light of at least 30 candle power. There were certainly 500 of them, and at their head marched a brass band of not less than 100 pieces. Bob's father and mother were speechless with amazement, but Mrs. Storms expressed a decided opinion that such going-ons at an hour when decent folks were getting ready for bed were scandalous, and stated that nothing of the sort would have been allowed when she was a girl, and that she didn't know what the world was coming to. As for Bob, he danced about like a jumping jack in his excitement. As Chris entered, he called out, forgetting all about their recent misunderstanding, "Say, come here quick. Did you ever see anything like this? Why, it lays over the circus parade even." "Lays over!" exclaimed Mrs. Green in an awful tone. "May I ask what you mean by that expression?" "Yes'm, I mean, I don't know what I mean. Jingo, look at that big fellow with the trombone. Say, Chris, do you think those buttons on their coats are real diamonds? Hello, look at the boys distributing handbills. Here comes one in here. Hey there, give us 5, will you?" A lad attired in a magnificent suit of old gold velvet, with diamond buttons as large as chestnuts, ran up to the open window and handed Mr. Green 5 of the circulars, which the astonished quintet now perceived were printed in gold on white satin. "We hope to see you there this evening, ladies and gentlemen," said the boy, touching his hat politely as he turned away. "Well, really, this is most extraordinary. Doesn't it strike you as being most extraordinary, Sabina?" ventured Mr. Green, addressing his wife. That lady did not condescend to reply. She was too busily engaged in the perusal of the handbill. This is what she read: Town Hall, this evening at 5:15 sharp. Professor Nemo, the world's greatest prestidigitator, will give one of his wonderful performances. His first appearance in America. Look out for our Grand Street Parade. Professor Nemo will never again appear in Lincolnville. Do not miss this opportunity. You cannot afford to stay away when the prices of admission are only adults 50 cents, children half price. See other side. And on the other side, Mrs. Green and her companions read the following: a few testimonials. I would rather miss my meals for a week than one of Professor Nemo's entertainments. Victoria. I have neither time nor inclination to bother with public affairs when Professor Nemo is in town. Bismarck. What are the cares of state to me when Nemo, the great, the only Nemo, is in town? Nothing. Gladstone. I would adjourn a session of my school at any time to enable my pupils to attend one of Professor Nemo's wonderful performances. Benedict Wacker, Dusenberry Academy. Nemo is funnier than a barrel of monkeys. Pulsifer Jukes, M.D. Professor Nemo can beat Presto out of his boots. Chris Wagstaff. Why, there's your name, Chris, exclaimed Bob, throwing down the advertisement. What do you know about this Professor Nemo? Chris, indignant that the genie had made this unauthorized use of his name, was about to stammer out a reply when Mrs. Green said, "Of course it is some other Wagstaff, Robert. I think there is a great scientist named Christopher Wagstaff. Is there not, Henry?" addressing her husband. "Great scientist? Yes, I believe there is," replied Mr. Green, who did not believe anything of the sort, but was willing to resort to any subterfuge to avoid an argument with his aggressive better half. "This Professor Nemo," he went on quickly, anxious to change the subject before he got into too deep water, "seems to be well spoken of. Suppose we go, Sabina, you and I and Mrs. Storms and the boys. I only offered it as a suggestion, you know, but really perhaps it might I shall interpose no objection, said the ex-schoolmarm, who was secretly more anxious to see the performance than was her husband. If Mrs. Storms wishes to go, it has always been my habit to yield to others in such matters. Well, snapped Mrs. Storms, you don't have to yield to me in this, Sabiny. I never went to but one show in my life. That was a panorama of the deluge, and the hall caught fire just as the animals was going into the ark, and we all had to run for our lives. I always said it was judgment, and I believe it was. No, Sabiny, I don't care to go, but don't let me keep you to 'em. Don't mind me. I'm only an old woman. Of course, is I got to go home day after tomorrow. I would like to see as much of you as I can, but dear me," and Mrs. Storms paused abruptly, gave a wheezy little sigh, and began fanning herself with Professor Nemo's announcement. "Of course we shall not go unless you accompany us," said Mrs. Green, in her most stately manner. "Oh, no, of course not," added Mr. Green, his jaw falling. "That is, certainly not." "Now isn't that just like her?" whispered Bob to his cousin. "She always spoils everything." Before Chris could reply, the hall door opened, and a stout elderly gentleman, attired in black and wearing a high white choker, entered and approached Mrs. Storms with outstretched hand, exclaiming, "My dear madam, I saw you at the window, and could not resist the temptation to enter and make an attempt to renew our old acquaintance. Notwithstanding the years that have passed since we last met, I knew you at a glance." "Your face looks natural," said Mrs. Storms, who had entrusted one of her mitted hands to the newcomer, "but I can't quite place you. Let's see, wasn't it in Perkins' Holler that we met?" "In Perkins' Holler it was," replied the stranger. "Ah, that was many years ago, Mrs. Storms." "Yes, 'twas," assented Mrs. Storms. "I just remember your name, though. Let's see, you ain't Mr. Bascombe, be you? 'Lijah Bascombe's brother?" "No," smiled the old gentleman, "though I recollect Elijah and his brother well. My name is Turner, Reuel Turner. At the time we met, I was the professor of languages at the Perkins Hollow Institute." "Seems if I did remember you now," said Mrs. Storms. "Ain't you teaching at the Institute now?" "No, nor have I been for many years," replied Professor Turner. "At present I'm traveling with Professor Nemo, the great prestidigitator." As he made this announcement, the old gentleman glanced significantly at Chris, and the boy fancied that he saw his right eyelid quiver slightly. "You a professor in a school traveling with a show?" gasped Mrs. Storms. "Well, that is a come down." "Not at all," said the genie. That it was his slave Chris was now certain. "If it were an ordinary show, I should, of course, consider my change of occupation a come down, as you tersely put it. But Professor Nemo is not an ordinary show by any means." "Ain't more, it can't be," asserted Mrs. Storms emphatically. "Ah, there you are wrong, my dear lady," protested the genie, with a deprecatory smile. "Professor Nemo's one aim in life is to instill correct moral principles into the mind of youth. Of course, we older people don't stand in such need of them. Nemo, I often say to him, why not yield in some degree to the public demand for frivolity? But the professor always replies, 'No, Turner, no. I have devoted my life to the elevation of my kind, and elevated they shall be while I retain my faculties.' That's the kind of man Nemo is." At this point, the spirit suddenly turned his face to Chris and made such an absurd grimace that the boy could not help laughing aloud. "Christopher!" cried Mrs. Green in her deepest tone. "A course of training under Professor Nemo would do that youth no harm," said the hypocritical genie, with lowering brow. But he added, "I am forgetting an important part of my errand here. My dear Mrs. Storms, will you not do me the honor of accompanying me to the professor's entertainment this evening? And perhaps our good friends here will go too. It will cost them nothing." At the last statement, Mrs. Storms brightened up. "Well, I don't know," she said, "but I forgot to introduce you, Professor. This is Mr. and Mrs. Green." "I am delighted to meet you," said the genie, "and trust that you will honor the entertainment with your presence." "Well, I'm sure we're much obliged," faltered Mr. Green, "but I guess we can't go, you see." "We will accept your kind invitation with pleasure," interrupted Mrs. Green. "With pleasure," echoed her spouse, trying to look as if he had not spoken before. "With great pleasure. That is," added Mrs. Green with her very best company air, "if Mrs. Storms will also attend." "Yes," chirped Mr. Green, "with that proviso, that proviso." "Wall," said Mrs. Storms, "there's some folks that ain't never willing to put themselves out about for others, but I ain't that kind. As I said to Sabiny only this morning—" "Exactly," interrupted the genie, "and you are quite right too. But if we are going, we must start at once. There is room for all in the carriage at the door." Chris knew that there had been no carriage there 10 seconds before, but behold, when he glanced out the window, his eyes rested upon a splendid barouche to which were attached two of the handsomest black horses he had ever seen. "I suppose we may as well go," piped Mrs. Storms. "All but that boy," with a nervous look at Chris. "He ain't well, and hadn't ought to set up late." "My dear Mrs. Storms," the genie hastened to assure her, "it will be much better for him to go than to mope here at home. Come, my friends, let us be off." When the party entered the carriage 5 minutes later, they saw the procession ascending a hill a mile distant, and the evening breeze brought to their ears a few notes of lively melody from the great band. "Isn't this just out of sight?" whispered Bob to Chris as they whizzed along the road. "Why, this Professor Nemo must be awfully rich. It's queer I never heard of him before. Jingo, here we are at the town hall already. Why, a bird couldn't have flown quicker." A liveried attendant rushed forward and assisted the ladies to dismount from the barouche. "I must leave you now," said Professor Turner, "as Professor Nemo requires my services in preparation for the entertainment. But this man will conduct you to your seats, the best in the house. An entire row is always reserved for my friends. Au revoir." And the genie, gaily waving his hand and kissing his fingertips to the somewhat scandalized Mrs. Storms, ran to the side entrance and disappeared. "This way, ladies and gentlemen," smiled the obsequious attendant, preceding the party into the building. "You will find the place somewhat changed." They did indeed find it changed. The interior of the dusty, musty old town hall was completely transformed. The floors were covered with Axminster carpet an inch thick. The walls were entirely hidden by hangings of crimson velvet embroidered with gold. The old benches had been replaced with luxuriously upholstered chairs, and the place was illuminated by electric lights. The hall was filled with a gaping multitude, and a splendid orchestra was playing the last movement of the overture to William Tell. "I'll tell you, Henry," said old Eben Pettibone, the janitor, waylaying Mr. Green as that gentleman trotted down the aisle, "this here Professor Nemo beats all creation. Paid me $100 down for the rent of the hall when he might have had it for 5. And look at the fixin's. Reckless extravagance, that's what I call it. He ain't no business man." Just as Chris and his friends took their seats, the overture ended with a tremendous chord, and the curtain rolled slowly up. The stage was set as a magnificently furnished drawing room. In the midst of the buzz of admiration and astonishment that the scene evoked, the genie glided upon the stage, and advancing to the footlights, made a low bow. The applauding throng stared at him in curiosity and wonder, but none with half the interest felt by Chris. As Professor Nemo, the slave of the lamp, had wrought a wondrous change in his personal appearance. He was now a stout, middle-aged man with a fierce black mustache, an aggressive-looking imperial, and a pair of small, twinkly black eyes. He was attired in a perfectly fitting suit of black, and upon the breast of his coat were fastened at least a dozen decorations blazing with jewels. In his hand he carried a small ebony wand. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, when the applause had subsided, "if I were not the slave of truth—" Chris had turned pale, fearing that the genie was going to make some reference to the lamp. "I should say that I was overcome by this reception, but, as a matter of fact, I am not. It takes a good deal to overcome me. But I am gratified, greatly gratified, of course. The highest ambition of a man who makes his living as I do must be to win the approbation of a Lincolnville audience. Feeling sure that I have gained that in advance, I will commence my entertainment. Now my methods, as you will soon see, are different from those from other prestidigitators. I will begin by requesting someone in the audience to suggest a trick. If I cannot perform it, I will forfeit $1,000. Ladies and gentlemen, I await your pleasure." Chris, panic-stricken, rose half from his seat. He felt that it was already necessary for him to interfere. What atrocity might not someone suggest and the genie perform? Before he could speak, a harsh, rasping voice broke the silence that had followed the genie's challenge, and all eyes were turned upon the tall, gaunt form of old Squire Gallop, who had risen to his feet. The squire had a local reputation as a humorist, and his friends knew by the particular way in which the left side of his mouth was drawn up and by the accumulation of wrinkles about his eyes that he was going to make an attempt to stump Professor Nemo, and he felt reasonably sure of success. Winking slowly, deliberately, and meaningly at Deacon Disbrow, who sat near him, he said, addressing the genie, "You say if you can't do anything you're asked to, that you'll pay $1,000. "That is precisely what I said," replied the genie, smilingly. "Who'll get the money?" demanded Squire Gallop. "The person who suggests the trick." "I suppose you wouldn't have no objections to placing the $1,000 in the hands of one of the audience," continued the squire. "Not the slightest," was the ready reply. "I'll place it in your hands. If I perform the feat you suggest, you can return it to me. If I fail, it's yours." And the genie took a roll of bills from his pocket and began counting out the amount in question. "Well, that's fair enough," said Squire Gallop, stepping out into the aisle and approaching the stage. "But I guess you won't be very likely to get your money back in a hurry." "I'll take the chances," laughed the genie, as he handed the squire 10 $100 bills. "Now, my dear sir, what is the trick you wish me to perform?" "Well," said the old man, after some deliberation, "I like to have you hang me to that chandelier," pointing to a large chandelier in the center of the ceiling, "afore I can say Jack Robinson. Jack—" The historic Mr. Robinson's Christian name had scarcely left Squire Gallop's lips when the amazed audience saw the village magnate suspended by his long yellowish white beard to one of the branches of the chandelier, kicking wildly and shrieking for help. Just how he had reached his present elevated position no one could tell, but there he was. There could be no doubt about that. The younger portion of the audience screamed with laughter, their elders with horror. Such a din had not been heard in the old town hall for many a year. When comparative quiet had been restored, the genie, addressing Squire Gallop, asked, "Do you wish to be released, sir, or do you prefer to retain your present position for the remainder of the evening?" "Get a ladder, somebody, and help me down," growled the squire. "I'll sue you for damages. I'll—" At this point the old gentleman vanished from sight, only to reappear in his seat a moment later, staring about him in helpless bewilderment and gasping for breath. "You do not feel any worse for your little adventure, do you, sir?" asked the genie politely. "Don't know as I do," replied Squire Gallop. "Wall, I never seen nothing like that." "Nor, in all probability, will you ever again," smiled the genie. "Well, sir, the $1,000 is still mine." "I suppose 'tis," admitted the squire regretfully. "Be kind enough to hand it to me." The old gentleman rose reluctantly and took the money from his pocket. He had scarcely done so when the roll of bills suddenly assumed the appearance of a giant firecracker and exploded with a report that made the windows rattle, threw the squire back into his seat with considerable violence, and elicited a chorus of screams from the ladies in the audience. "There's no harm done," said the genie lightly. "Only a few dollars gone up in smoke. That doesn't worry me any, for I have plenty more. And now, ladies and gentlemen," he went on, "I will give you another little exhibition of my power which may interest those who are not used to such things, and I don't think many of you are." As he spoke, he descended the half a dozen steps that led from the stage to the floor of the hall, and laid his hand familiarly on the shoulder of Sile Blodgett, the butcher, who occupied one of the aisle seats on the second row. "I am informed," continued the genie, with a glance at Chris, "that some prestidigitators find rabbits concealed beneath the coats of certain of their patrons. but I will venture to assert that never before did a gentleman bring under his coat to a place of public entertainment anything like this." And he thrust his hand under Mr. Blodgett's coat and brought out a huge St. Bernard dog, almost as large as the butcher himself. As the animal, barking furiously, rushed up to the aisle and jumped upon the stage, the genie said, "You'd better leave that dog at home the next time you go out for an evening, sir. But dear me, what's this?" The next moment he had hauled apparently from Mr. Blodgett's vest pocket an immense black bear, which laboriously climbed upon the stage, and growling ominously took its place beside the dog. "Well, I swaw!" gasped Mr. Blodgett. The genie tripped lightly back to the platform and waved his wand over the two animals, and presto, they both vanished. "Now," he said briskly, silencing an enthusiastic burst of applause by a gesture, "will some gentleman in the audience kindly lend me a hat?" "Here's one," piped Mr. Green, disregarding in his excitement a withering look from his wife, and tossing his new silk hat to the genie, who caught it deftly, saying, "Thank you, sir. What is this?" As he drew from the hat a large white horse, which, handling it with as much apparent ease as if it were a feather, he deposited, prancing and whining, upon the stage. "Hallo, sir," went on the genie. "Why, what have we here? You seem to have a remarkable fondness for pets." He then proceeded to draw from Mr. Green's hat a deer, half a dozen sheep, as many dogs, a zebra, a kangaroo, and finally an elephant. As he returned the hat to its astonished owner, with a smile and a bow, he said, "This, ladies and gentlemen, concludes the first part of my entertainment. There will now be a brief intermission, during which the orchestra will play Wagner's wonderful tone picture, the overture to Tannhäuser, with which you are all doubtless unfamiliar. After the intermission, I shall, for your amusement, transport this hall and all of its contents to one of the Sandwich Islands in less than 5 seconds." "He can't do that," giggled Mr. Green as the curtain descended. "That's too much even for him." But Chris knew it wasn't, and was pale with horror. Who could tell what the result of this daring feat might not be? It would never do to allow him to carry his purpose into execution. "I've got to interfere, no matter what folks think," murmured the boy, and he sprang from his seat, rushed up the aisle, and left the hall. "That boy's stark raving mad," gasped Mrs. Storm. "I told you he ought not be allowed to come." Meantime, Chris had reached the stage entrance. In another moment he stood in the genie's dressing room, facing his slave, who seemed to be in the best possible humor. End of section 11.